All right, everybody, welcome to our fifth Run Talk on April the 20th. I just want to say welcome to everybody here. We have a really great lineup for you today, and we're going to be talking all about performance and run technology. I'm really excited about this one, being kind of a run geek and a data geek myself. So I hope you guys are all as well. And if you're not, hopefully you will be after this. Today we've got joining us Jess O'Connell, who is a Canadian Olympic athlete, Pan Am Games medalist, the current women's 3,000 meter record holder, and the brains behind At Run Backup Plan in conjunction with Grit Coaching. Hey Jess, how's it going?
Good. Hey guys.
Hey.
Yeah, Jess.
We've also got Malc Kent joining us. Malc is a world leader in indoor or outdoor remote gait analysis and works as a global expert consultant to run scribe technology. Malc has enjoyed working with world elite athletes for the past 19 years in running and has helped companies such as Red Bull, The North Face, Adidas, Nike, Garmin, Stride, Dorsavi, and more. Malc is an expert in this field. We worked with him before. Hey Malc, how's it going?
Hey, good. What should I say? I should say good morning or afternoon to everyone. Depends where you are.
Yeah, depends on where you are, yeah. And Malc's joining us all the way from the United Kingdom, so thanks very much, Malc, for joining us. And we have Jonathan Lowe. John is a product performance specialist for Garmin working here in Cochrane. He's skilled in research, epidemiology, exercise physiology, biomechanics, and program evaluation. John, how's it going?
Awesome. Thanks, Raph.
Good to have you guys. Really excited about today's run. There's going to be lots to talk about, I'm sure. Before we get into that stuff, I've got a few really quick announcements for you guys. Before that, even, I'm just going to quickly paste everyone's Instagram handles into the chat. So if anybody wants to follow any of these wonderful people, feel free to. Yeah, so before we get into it, I'm just going to go over some of the really cool virtual stuff happening these days. So we have the Lululemon Move and Stay Connected Challenge happening on Strava. That encourages participants to sign up using to the Strava app and move at least 20 minutes per day, 5 days a week. Super cool. Thank you to Lululemon for that. There's a bunch of other Strava challenges as well. There's also the Novid 20 virtual run. That's being done by Blaine Penny in Mito, Canada. The Novid 20 virtual run is a global challenge using Strava to engage, unite, and inspire the running community to keep fit, keep motivated, and proceeds from it will be going to support COVID-19. We've also got the Anti-Social Run Club. Shout out to Jeff. They're into week 5 of their training plan, and that's from Jeff and Dr. Katie Bates. Definitely check them out on Instagram. I'm going to post their handle in there shortly. Also, a big shout out to our OG partner, which was Big Rock Beer. I'd be remiss to not give them a shout out. They do deliveries, and in this physical distancing era, that is amazing. Right now, I am having one of their awesome vodka sodas, which it's noon, as I pointed out earlier, so that's totally acceptable. And finally, if you love the content that we're creating here and would like to contribute to it somehow, I'm about to post a PayPal link and with the other links, that's the bottom there. And the funds used for that are just to create digital infrastructure. So things like web hosting and Zoom lines and all that stuff. You can find a ton of really cool content on shutuplegs.org and yycruncrew.com, which will be relaunching later this spring. So I'm going to post those links into the chat here now as well for you guys to all check out. So with that all aside, welcome guys. How was everybody's weekend?
Not too bad.
Yeah. Got some vitamin D, first time in a while.
Yeah, I don't think there's much that white stuff left on the ground, so that's a positive thing.
Yeah.
Just a tiny bit. How about you, Malc? Is it stereotypical Wales, England over there, or I see the sun shining?
Yeah, the sun is, we've been lucky. We've had like 5 weeks of like clear blue sky and sunshine and really good weather. So I keep my mouth shut because I know that's not always been the case. So I don't say too much, but it's been good. Yeah, absolutely.
So you guys have been literally getting better weather than we have here in Calgary. Cool.
For the time
Is that
being.
a surprise?
That's right.
It always comes back though, right? There's a time of the year when it will flip the other way. So.
Cool. So we're going to dig into it because there's a lot to talk about today. I'll just give a really quick reminder to all the people joining us on Zoom. Feel free to ask questions in the chat. You can ask people directly, or you can message me personally, and I will put a pin in that and help moderate our discussion. Also, everything that we have on here is going to be on YouTube later on for you guys to reference back to. So that being said, I'm just going to kind of like dig into it and just start chatting because I think there's a lot to talk about today. Jess, I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
How's it going? What's training like? What's life like for you these days?
It is different but the same because we're so lucky that we can still run. Like, oh my God, I feel so much sympathy for basically any athlete who's not a runner or wasn't prior to about a month ago, because we can maintain a lot of normalcy. I work online with my online coaching and whatnot, so my day-to-day actually isn't that much different. But right before the lockdown started, I've been nursing an Achilles injury for the last 2 months or so. So right before the lockdown started, I hopped on Kijiji and I like scoured all of the ads, and I bought an elliptical for $250, which I think is probably, honestly, it's probably worth more than my car, and I love it more than my car. So I'm logging a lot of time on there. And so my days sort of alternate between elliptical, do some work, do some stretching, more elliptical, more work, more mobility, rehab exercises, which is not that different than my regular life, to be honest.
Well, that's cool. I know that you did an awesome Instagram takeover on Wednesday with us. Super stoked. So thank you for that. It was really interesting. Like so many of the questions and so many of the topics that we see kind of coming up right now really has to do with like injury. But I want to ask you, like, how did you like doing the takeover? What was some of the most common questions that you ended up kind of fielding that day?
It was fun. I liked it because often in my training, I'm like, I wish I could tell people about this. People need to know this. like, it took me 7 years to figure out that I should probably do some like banded squats before I run. I got to tell people. So it was a good platform to spew a lot of my information that I'm like, I really want to share really quickly and easily. So I enjoyed that. I really enjoyed answering people's like specific questions because I always like questions. I think it's interesting to hear what people are interested in. And a lot of it was just a variety of like, how do you run, basically? How do you incorporate running? How do you advance in running? So I get the sense that there are a lot of people who are new to running right now who are enjoying it and trying to ramp it up or stay healthy or take it to the next level.
Yeah, well, and it's crazy. Like yesterday, my wife Shirley and I just went for a walk, and one of the things that's really struck me over the last little while is like the number of people who I don't think typically run who we're seeing running now with this kind of like this back to basics era of run. Because like, and not to typecast anybody, but I'll be walking and I'll see somebody running in like the worst shoes for running, and just kind of like I think we saw a guy yesterday running in what Shirley and I could only describe as like dress pants and like a fleece sweater. I'm like,
I see a lot of jeans, which I don't understand.
Yes.
Jeans.
Didn't get it. It was just the craziest thing. But it's cool to see so many people running again, and I hope that like next year that translates into like more people doing races, because I think that people are starting to get that taste of it, which is super cool.
Totally.
So one of the things that like, obviously, like, actually, I'll back up. For those of you who don't know Jess, why don't you talk a little bit of like, you're a 3,000 meter and 5,000 meter specialist. You're the women's record holder in the 3,000 meter. But that doesn't mean you only run like 3K and 5K. Like, tell us a little bit about like your training volume and like your life kind of.
Yeah. Like I said, I've been hurt, so things right now are a little bit atypical, but when I'm healthy, I'm running like 70 to 80 miles a week. And that's spread out over normally 6 days. I normally take a day off every week. I find I feel a lot stronger and refreshed if I do. And I do 2 to 3 hard workouts, so intervals or tempo runs, depends on the season, hill repeats, whatever. 2 or 3 hard workouts a week. The rest of the days are easy runs and sometimes a long run. So my long run is the longest it goes is an hour 45.
Okay. So that's something that all of us can kind of like wrap our minds around.
Yeah. Yeah.
We had Rachel McIntosh on last week, and she was telling us about, when she was a heptathlete, her life was such that she never really ran further than a kilometer until she became a distance runner. So it always helps to kind of get a sense of scale with regards to how much the athletes we have on here run.
For sure. A lot of my time that sort of gets missed in the count is spent doing rehab exercises or strength training or rolling, all the little things behind the scenes that can let me do these really hard workouts and this like sustained mileage. I guess it works medium because I'm hurt right now, but ideally after this injury, it will never happen again.
Yeah, well, and that's actually so important. And I think that, if there's one thing that's becoming clear over time right now, it's just like, of all the times, now we have the time to do those activation exercises and to do those stretches and do all the things. Because typically for me, at least, like I go for a run and then I plop myself down on the couch and I have like a recovery drink if I'm on the ball that day. But now there's like no excuses to not do yoga and not do activations and not do stretching and stuff like that. So
100%. Like I was due to start running again from this. I had a 20% Achilles tear, which I'm told is not a big deal. It sounds like a big deal to me, but regardless, I couldn't run for about 6-8 weeks, and that time's passed now. I'm like cleared to start doing a walk run in theory, but my career has basically been do something impressive like make worlds or the Olympics or something, get hurt, run fast again, do something impressive again, get hurt, something impressive again, get hurt. Like cyclically pretty much. Like I haven't run in the fall since I think 2014, 2015, because it always hurt at the end of the season. And I'm just tired of that. Like that's not how I want my career to be. And so this whole like Olympic postponement and stuff has given me this second chance to like do things properly for the first time ever. So I'm clear, like technically my Achilles isn't torn now. I can start doing a walk run, but I haven't yet because I'm trying really, really hard to like rebuild my mechanics. And I'm doing lots of 2-foot hops and looking at my form, doing some strengthening exercises, trying to fix my loading. And then hopefully soon I'll progress to 1-foot hops because I've been at 2-foot hops for longer than I was expecting. But it just shows that there was this huge gap, and all of a sudden, like these injuries somewhat make sense. These are things that I've never worked on because it's always been, oh yeah, it would be nice to redo my form or work on these weaknesses, but I have like a world championship in 6 weeks. The low hanging or the carrot is like always right in front of my nose. And now that this is taken away, there's time to actually get really unfit with hopes of like super compensating later, which has been, I'm actually really excited to have a chance to make some substantial changes.
Well, it's fantastic that you're kind of finding that silver lining here and finding like that opportunity to kind of like continue to grow as an athlete, because I think it's very rare that we get those like gifts. I think some people I've talked to have been talking about like they're training more than ever right now, which is just super cool because I think, we all kind of need something here to keep us going. So
totally.
Raf, I think if I can say something what Jess said, I think that it's really interesting because so often as runners, we go out on a run, we come home, maybe do some stretching, just like you said, maybe if I'm having a good day, I'm going to get a recovery drink in. But those things that Jess just touched on like the recovery and the rolling and the, all those mobility type things, I think initially I know I've found that this in myself, is not until you get injured. I got injured and then was forced to do that rolling thing. And it's hard to implement that because short term, I feel like you don't really see those short term effects. If I'm moving all the time, if I'm doing my hops and mobility, things like that, I'm not going to see the difference in a week or 2 weeks because I'm not going to get injured. But if I am doing that in a long-term perspective, in a month or 2 months, maybe 3 months out, that's going to prevent me from an overuse injury because I put that time in 3 months ago consistently,
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's an interesting point for runners to realize that like, if we do it now, we might not see those effects immediately, but long-term, for sure you will, I think.
Absolutely.
100%. It's like brushing your teeth. And
Yeah.
I heard somewhere that they flavor toothpaste like minty so that it feels like you get something out of it. But they don't have to. It could be tasteless. But if it was tasteless, no one would ever brush their teeth because it feels like they're getting nothing out of it.
That's a good one. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, me neither.
And like Malc, I'll get you to chime in on this one because you can literally see injuries coming with athletes when you're doing the gait analysis, can't you?
Yeah, and I think like some great points have been made by the other guys already. But when you have kind of like a sort of a hidden enemy, if you like, that can just hang out and you don't ever see it. You know, a lot of people say, well, I'm healthy right now, and if I go and run like the next 7 days straight, I don't feel any problem. And you've got something underlying, but it's like it's at least sort of like 1 degree of sort of separation away from you mentally. So you know, what you don't know is there. It's very easy to just like carry on and say, well, it feels absolutely fine right now. Like I don't feel any symptoms. So so that's one of the problems with the long-term repetitive use injuries is that yeah, there's bad things happening, but you don't necessarily feel the symptoms of it straight away. So but yeah, I mean, it is possible, as we'll get into later on. You know, technology's moved on so much that we can really understand quite a lot in a predictive sense today about where people are heading in the future and whether that's a good place or a bad place.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that statistically, there's very few people that are heading towards a good place. So most runners are heading to a bad place, and then it's sort of like a variation of like how bad and how soon. So it's extremely rare that somebody really is like absolutely fantastic in the data, and you're going to say, well, look, you can run for a year and you'll have no problem at all. So that's an extremely rare thing for sure.
Yeah. Well, it's so tricky. And I think that like, you know, as athletes, we're all kind of conditioned to just like go and go and go. And then we don't really hit pause until we get an injury. And that's kind of, you know, that could have been prevented had we had like the tools or the awareness to make sure that doesn't happen. So Jess, like I mean, you have the Run Backup Plan. And for those of you who are listening who don't know, Run Backup Plan really focuses on like getting injured runners back to running. What are some of the most common injuries that you see as a coach, as an athlete?
Yeah, so just to clarify that more, in this fall when I was hurt yet again, surprise, surprise, I was just really frustrated, and this was a surprise injury, so I didn't have any off-season plans or anything, so I was suddenly faced with all this time, and as almost like a coping thing, I was like, I'm gonna write down everything I know about cross training because maybe it'll help someone else who's injured, because I have sort of figured this out for myself over the last decade, so it would be really nice to have a manual. So I made basically like an ebook. So if you're hurt, if you know someone that's hurt, runbackupplan.com, you can download it. It's free, whatever. Just go knock yourself out. Don't actually do that. One of my injuries was a concussion, so careful. The types of injuries we see really varies, but they're just like Malc was saying, they're all overused. Kind of depends on what your weakest link is. But one thing that I really fear for with the masses of people on the pathways, which I think is so beautiful, is that they've basically gone from zero to hero, and they're not doing stability exercises. They're not doing any rehab, prehab, or anything because that's not fun, and they don't see a need, and it's because running's new and easy, and maybe not easy yet, but it doesn't seem necessary. And one thing that we do with all of our athletes that I coach is build them up both in mileage and intensity, because intensity is very, very hard on your body, and I think a lot of people overlook that. And that is where a ton of my injuries and the other track athletes I've seen injuries have come from, is not actually the mileage, but introducing hard, fast workouts too fast. So if you think about it, if you're doing just pure mileage and then all of a sudden you add in one hard workout a week, then you've increased your intensity infinitely. And then if you move to 2 workouts a week, you've now then doubled that intensity. You would never double your mileage in a week, but you would if you double your intensity going from 1 workout to 2, which is a normal thing. Like people do that when they're ready, but you need to do it slowly and carefully. So one thing that we do with our athletes is, rather than just in someone who's new and who's just started training, once we ramp up their mileage slowly, so they've got a bit of a foundation, we'll just add pickups into their run. So 5 by 2 minutes hard, or 5 by 3 minutes, whatever. Something like some speed, but something unstructured, because that's a lot easier on your body than all of a sudden doing hill repeats or kilometer repeats or even a long tempo run. So just slowly introducing intensity, because injuries come when something's changed. So, I mean, the change can be starting running, but it could be running more on the pathway because now it's sunny, running on trails for the first time, adding intensity, whatever. So something we've worked hard on with our clients is just anytime there's a change, it's built in really gradually.
Cool. And I think actually there's one thing I want to touch on there, because it's kind of stepping away from the injury discussion, but one of the things you talked about in your Instagram takeover was polarization in training. And that's something that I'm always talking to new runners about, or people will ask, like, how do I get faster? And obviously, like, one of the biggest things is consistency. But I'm always trying to impress upon people the importance of, like, making your hard runs hard and your easy runs easy. Can you tell us a little bit about that and, like, the importance of it?
For sure. It's a little bit hard to wrap your head around, because I get it. Like, it's very tempting to hammer out all of your workouts because it feels like you've done something. And you also see that a lot right now with people who are doing like Instagram workouts nonstop, because they're satisfying. You finished, you're like, yeah, I sweated. My heart rate got really, really high. And I think there's nothing wrong with that if you're just if you're exercising, if you're just exercising. But you need to remember that there is a difference between exercising and training. So if you're training, that implies that your goals are performance oriented. So you want to get faster, basically, or you want to be able to run more or something like that. So polarized training means that you do several hard days a week and several more easy days a week. So the way you split your training depends on what you're training for, but often you'll see something like 20% or less of training is actually spent running really, really hard, and the rest is all very easy. So something we suggest to our athletes is an easy run should always pass the talk test. So if you were running with a buddy, you'd be able to carry on a conversation easily. This lets you recover, and it also lets you do these hard days, hard meaning intervals or tempo runs or whatever, hard, really, really hard. Whereas if every single day was kind of moderate somewhere in the middle, you'd never really be recovering, and you'd never really be working as hard as you could on your hard days. So it's really important to buy into this by remembering that you don't actually get fitter from the hard workouts. Like, the execution of the workout itself is not making you fitter. It's the recovery from the damage basically done by that workout. So if you're not optimizing the recovery from that really hard workout, then you're losing out on fitness gains.
Right. That it's so important, because I think that some people don't realize, like, you see a lot of people go for like tempo run, and then slowly those tempo runs aren't getting faster, but they're just like, the person's just getting more tired.
Yeah.
They take like a week off and they have this great tempo run again. They think that's like, oh, this is what I got to do.
Yeah.
It's really good to hear kind of like that coming from you. One thing that I want to ask you, kind of working into kind of the theme of the day, is how do you kind of integrate technology into training? Like, do you train with just pace? Do you train with pace and heart rate? Do you have like people look at your gait and your analysis and your stride? Like, what's that look like for you now?
I recently bought a GPS watch. It's a Garmin.
Yes!
So I got it on Fiji. So I don't know what that means in terms of Garmin support. But I hadn't used a lot of GPS in my training until lately, and I'm still a little bit on the fence for it. Since most of my workouts are on the track, I get a lot of pace and time feedback. And I do use my GPS for tempo runs, like on the pathway. So anything that's a workout that has like specific objectives, I really like to track, and I find that really motivating. However, I was wearing it for a lot of my easy runs, and I found that I was trying to push the pace to get this beautiful, nice, like 4:30 kilometer or something like that. And I realized if I'm not checking the GPS every 5 seconds and I'm running by feel, my easy run pace normally gravitates to like 4:40, 4:50 with like stops and starts and stuff. So I've actually stopped wearing it for easy days because it's just like unneeded, unnecessary data and stress.
Yeah.
I like heart rate. I use it a lot when I cross train to make sure that what I'm doing is hard enough. And the biggest piece of technology that I've integrated lately is videoing a lot of my exercises, especially with this injury rehab. And I think it's valuable beyond just getting feedback from my coaches and stuff, because I watch the videos too, and it's really valuable to understand myself, like, oh, I'm moving in this way. What if I try to move this way? So it's more of a proactive, like more like intimate look at an exercise versus just doing it and then like relying on someone else's feedback. I find it very valuable for learning how to process my own movements myself.
Yeah, it's really interesting you should say that. And I think, one thing is, like, Jess and I, we see the same physio that keeps us both running. But, like looking at kind of the slow-mo video with Tyson, you can kind of like pinpoint every little thing that's kind of going on in the run. And it's so important to understand that, even if like, on some level, like what's going on, like just having that understanding is crucial. I'm actually going to use that to pivot over to you, Malc. You're an expert in remote gait analysis. You've done an incredible amount of work with so many different brands. I've had the pleasure of working with you a couple of times. Why don't you kind of introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you do to those listening today?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks, Raf. And I'll just, before I start, I'll just say, if there's any noise from any like random child in the background, please, I'll try and talk over it. But it's just that time of the day here. So, but my background, I'm originally an applied physicist by training, by skill set, and then got into data science and data analysis. And it's been about 20 years of working with athletes around the world, and sort of applying that understanding of applied physics and mechanics to solve athlete problems. And I've been pretty lucky the last 10 years for sure, like working with different brands, developing different products, some of which still exist today, and some have evolved, and that's crossed over from technology into shoe development and other areas as well. But I guess for the last 8 years, I've been really pushing in the field of what can we do remotely, so the athlete can be anywhere in the world, and how can they be helped in a way that's scientifically legitimate? Because obviously, we could just buy something off the internet pretty cheap, throw it on the person, get some numbers. But what we've seen with wearable technology is, initially there was a huge uptake many years ago, and then there was sort of a plateau off period where people started to question what was the point of the technology. You had numbers, but like, what value was it really? Was it really actually changing decisions and really doing positive things for athletes? And so that was a big part of the thinking in the last say 8 years, getting to work with some of the companies out there that you mentioned and some others, trying to answer that question, like how can those people in remote locations really get the valuable support? And then the last few years, done a lot of clinical work, a lot of traveling around North America, more than 100 clinics, helping clinics use wearable technology in what they do in the physical space. And then that allows me to sort of compare sort of remote data to physically collected on-site data, and see that the remote data is really getting calibrated and is really working. And then just recently, in the last year, really kind of pushing the technology to the limit. I mean, I've been lucky in the last year just to work with some of the guys in Kenya for the NN running team out there, and obviously there's a few famous people. One of them is called Kipchoge in that group, and we've been fortunate enough to have sensors on those guys for the last 2.5 years, and obviously been able to sort of validate that the methods work, which we've seen Kipchoge has done pretty well the last couple of years. But so that's been really fun, because that's the ultimate acid test. Is you can have all these fancy metrics, you can have fancy methods for analyzing the data, but it's really when you've got guys that are thousands of miles away, and they're in a rural location, and intermittent Wi-Fi, that kind of stuff, and and they're able to truly benefit from it, and the coaches and the physio are able to benefit from it, then that there's something good going on. But really the most satisfying thing recently is where you get more regular level runners who actually, you can actually show, if you go through the whole process with them, that they have avoided something. So, you know, the classic scenario is you've got someone, they've got a marathon in the future, whether it's Boston, whatever the target is, and they have injury problems that are cropping up. It's really getting in the way of their training. They're having to take, we normally, in the medical sphere, an injury is something where you take X amount of days forced out of the training. So if you take like 7 days out of training, that's statistically classed as an injury, for example. So, you know, those guys are like really coming up against it, and they're like, oh, I've got the target marathon in just 1 month, and like, I'm not going to make it to the start line. Like, I need help. And so you have a great chance there to make an intervention, and you can test whether what you're doing really makes a difference. And so, and clearly, if they're able to turn the corner in that month or 2 months, they go to that marathon, they run that marathon completely symptom-free. That was not the original trajectory that they were on. So, you know, that's the most satisfying thing, really. And and then you get the finish line picture, and they're like, yeah, I made it, and I had no knee troubles. And that's kind of what's been getting me pumped over the last year or so. It's only been recent, though. We've only had enough legitimate scientific data coming from a device to do this properly in the last, say, 2, maybe 3 years. Before that, we had devices that tried to do it, but it was not really very scientifically legitimate. Yeah.
Right. And what would you say, like, the biggest benefit from those is it mostly like injury prevention? Are you making runners faster? Especially, like, I mean, I can say that in 2 contexts. One being, you know, when you're looking at runners like Kip and the Kenyan team, you know, is it all about making them more efficient and preventing injury, or is it just making them faster?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's probably, in the reality, you know, what actually happens when the rubber meets the road, it's probably about 80% injury, I would say, maybe even 90. And that's just the truth of what is critical and where people need help and put their hand up, right? So, you know, so where you take some of these kind of sub 210 or even sub 205 elite marathon runners, they generally train in groups, especially in a place like Ethiopia or Kenya. And so where you've got one coach looking after between, say, 15 and 40 people, you're basically triaging. So you want to know, like, who's, you know, who's about to sort of like fall off the cliff quite soon. And so that's why about 80-90% of it is really injury prevention. And the other part of that story is that if the person is being coached, so we're not talking about an individual now just kind of doing it by themselves, but there's some sort of coaching system, then really the performance lies mostly with the coach. And certainly when you're talking with the elite guys who have already run sub 210, sub 205, it's not really my place to do much in the performance realm, because the coach has probably already done a very good job. And so, you know, it's not so much for this podcast, but I can tell you just of like firsthand knowledge over many years, the guys that are running sub 205 and saying they will, and then actually going and running that time, they're not doing anything special in their training. I can tell you that right now. And so you could pull out like a 0.1 difference in a metric or a number and tell them to refine that. It wouldn't really make any difference. Their training's pretty basic, actually. It's and what's really cool is the amount of time that they spend injury free. And if you look at someone like Kipchoge compared to maybe the 10 or 12 people around him who are the same age and have trained for as long in the same area, they haven't been as successful because they haven't put all those years back to back injury free. So, you know, the one thing that you're getting from the physio, the coach, is like, can you just keep people injury free somehow?
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, okay, well, yeah, I'll help your physio do that kind of thing. So,
yeah, that's really cool, because I think that, like we've talked about, you know, up until this point in the conversation, like, so much of you know, being a good runner is staying injury free. So I mean, if you can be providing that to them, that's fantastic. So one of the questions that I got asked here, this was a little bit more specific to shoes, and obviously there's a lot of trends in shoes right now. There's shoes that are making people faster. There's shoes that are like boxing gloves that are supposed to be basically preventing people from getting injured. And the question that I got kind of thrown at me here is that, you know, you kind of go into some stores and they'll throw somebody into a stability shoe, but they don't know necessarily like what the person's gait and what their stride looks like. Is that almost like is it almost more dangerous to put somebody into a stability shoe versus a neutral shoe? Is there some reasoning behind that when we're talking about shoes? Because one thing we're seeing a lot of people getting into is not knowing what shoe to get right now.
It's a difficult one to answer without getting political. So I try and keep it as objective as I can. Obviously, I don't know about the standard of a particular shoe store, or whoever somebody might go and see. But I try and generalize a touch. The first question to ask, if you're a runner going into a store, you want to ask the exact questions you just pose, which is like, what is this based on? So if it really is just kind of like subjective opinion, or someone's maybe, I don't know, like just kind of like staring at your arches and your feet, or just getting you to walk up and down, I can tell you that that's not really of any scientific value. There's nothing much happening there. I've seen people use, there's obviously commercial incentives, but I've seen people use pressure mats and stuff like that. Person walks across a pressure mat. That's entirely different to what happens when they run, and they put, multiple times body weight down on a foot on one side. So yeah, it's good to ask those questions as you're going to a store and seeing what they're doing. What is this based on? They should be able to give you some good validation, justification behind what they're doing. But the idea of this, we used to have this very, very basic categorization, 3 types of shoe, essentially: a neutral shoe, some kind of stability shoe, and then a full motion control shoe. And that's really sort of proven over the years to be far too simplistic. Now shoes just cross over, so they're not really in one category. They can be in the whole continuum, the whole spectrum. So the truth behind it is, for a lot of years it didn't really do a huge amount. Now we've got a bit more sophisticated technology. Some of the shoes that have come out, what's it called now, the sort of Odyssey React, which is like Nike's kind of 50% injury reduction shoe or whatever. There is actually like some really good science behind that. But getting back to the basic breakdown, it's I don't know if this statistic is exactly correct, but it's something around 60 or 70% of people can just have a neutral shoe and be completely fine. So it's actually the minority of people that need some kind of motion control. Without getting too detailed about it, it does come down to measuring some metrics, and there are some criteria around pronation and pronation rates that would lead people into a decision. Pretty rare I see that. I think you could go to 100 shoe stores and 99 of them would not know that that's the case. But and then I'm sure as other people, like previous guests and Jess can talk about, you always go, even in a clinical setting, you go to a conservative solution first. So the first thing that you go to is always strength training, always checking adequate mobility, that kind of stuff. And that can often be what you need, but you keep the person in a neutral shoe at the same time. Because as soon as they're not in a neutral shoe, they go to a motion control type shoe, then it's artificial augmentation. So as much as possible, you're trying to keep all of those muscles, all of those bones working together in a multi-segmental way as much as possible organically through things like strength training, increasing mobility. So that's always the solution, or should be the solution first if that person's got a problem, before just going, oh, you need a motion control shoe. So yeah.
I mean, it's incredible the amount of how much technology has kind of like given us insight into how the body moves and the mechanics that are involved with that. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Malc's work, I definitely encourage you guys to listen to his podcast, The Art and Science of Running, as well as just go onto his Run Physics and check out his website. Because like when we went into your facility there, one of the coolest things in the world was just like looking at like the amount of data that you could look at with regards to running. And I would almost categorize myself, I was a cyclist before I was a runner. And I think cyclists were used to seeing just like tons and tons of like watts and like power phases and all that stuff. And now that we're starting to see that come into running, it's just like, it's really cool. I mean, that being said, Hoff did his 2:08, 2:09 marathon without wearing a watch. So who knows if that's making me faster, but it's all good. And John, I want to bring you into the conversation on that too. Like, you work for Garmin, you do product performance. What's kind of some of the big, like, how have you seen technology like like gait analysis and run power and heart rate variability and pulse ox kind of change run?
That's a good question. I think, man, I remember when I started running with a watch, it was a Timex, and ran with I think Garmin's, one of their first forerunners was a 305. It was just like, I don't know if anybody
It was huge.
Prick on your wrist. Yeah, didn't have optical heart rate or anything. And then getting it off the watch was another task, to plug it into your computer and wait until it did the syncing and all that stuff. And then now to fast forward to today, where there's all a gamut of different watches that you could purchase depending on what you're looking for. So I think it's really, really interesting, because basically we have, like you said, there's so many different metrics that you can get from your watches now, and that enable us as runners to gauge our performance and to then change our performance to be the most efficient that we can be. And I think that's an important thing to realize. Obviously, from Garmin's perspective, one of our main mottos is to beat yesterday, right? And so I can't tell you how many meetings I sit in on a daily basis where the overarching theme is, how can we help our consumers run a faster 5K, or how can we help our consumers run a faster marathon? And so to be able to create the technology, to put that technology into the watches, so that our customers can use those metrics to say, hey, wow, I noticed this in my stride length, or I was able to connect my watch to Zwift and go for a run and get these kinds of metrics, and to be able to then get those in an easy way and to judge that. But having said that, going back to kind of what Jess alluded to, I work for Garmin and I love Garmin products, but at the same time, there's something to be said about going for a run without anything, just a bare run away from tech, to be able to say, yeah, I'm just going to gauge. Because I think a lot of times, sometimes technology can get in the way of like, okay, wait, I'm feeling this way, but I need to confirm that I'm feeling that way by looking at my Garmin Connect or by looking at my Forerunner, and I think that's maybe partially could be a negative thing of falling into. It's important for sure to be able to look at our watches and say, yeah, this is my pace, and yeah, this is what zones I was in when I was running. And obviously, I would argue, from an overarching perspective, that's going to help you get faster by getting those metrics. But having said that, again, it's important to say, okay, what are my boundaries with this crazy technology? Like you said, Raph, I mean, if you wanted to, you could get wrapped up in numbers for days. I mean, I might be part of that person. I get home from my run, and the first thing I do is, even before I stretch, is sync my watch so that I can look at and see my zone, see my pace, see my stride length, all those things. And it helps, I think, personally for me. But at the same time, it's good to say, okay, yeah, that was a good run, but I'm not going to get too wrapped up in that, because I know that was just one day, that was just one run.
Yeah. I'm going to kind of insert myself into the panel here, because when we were first kind of pitching this idea as the panel, I was saying, like, I could talk till the cows come home about run tech and heart rate variability and all that stuff. So I'll kind of like talk a little bit. Like, sporadically, like I have a Garmin Phoenix and I use a Garmin Run Pod. And I know that they're doing a ton of really cool research at the UFC Human Performance Lab up in Cochrane with Garmin. And I'll use something like the Run Pod. I'll look at the amount of like the ground contact time, the stride length, all those little pieces of information. And I want to kind of pose to, I guess, to all of you, should runners be going out and starting to like get as much information as possible? One of the questions that we got in, we have a lot of runners who don't even train really with heart rate yet. And I think that with all this technology, kind of run the risk, like some runners can be really overwhelmed and just not know what to do with all that data. With the amount of data and technology, like, is it something that it's worthwhile for us to all invest in and learn more about, or is it kind of like whatever? What are your thoughts on that?
I I think I think it's definitely good to have some form of feedback from your run. Obviously, like Jess said, she, a lot of times she goes to the track and she has her maybe a stopwatch, but she has her coach that gives her, or whoever is with her at the track, that gives her feedback. And I think that that's valuable. And I think that each person, everybody's different, and whatever you need to be able to improve your training is the best for you, and I think obviously, I work for Garmin, so I that's why I'm here, because I truly believe that having something on your wrist or a heart rate strap or some method of feedback from your run, is very important.
Yeah.
I agree with Jonathan that everyone's different. And even though I sometimes need to just use my Timex, which I've had for 15 years, my boyfriend is extremely motivated by data. And I don't know if he would run as much if he didn't get to download his stuff after and see what he did. And in the same way, like, I do all of my runs listening to music, which is sort of a faux pas. Too many people are like, oh no, you must hear your breath and nature and your own thoughts, but I don't like that. I don't find that satisfying. And he would never listen to music. So I think that there's no right answer. It's like you'll gravitate towards your own solution.
What about you, Malc, especially in the context of, like, with all the data and all the pieces of information we have available to us, like, or say somebody who just has like a Garmin Phoenix or a Garmin Forerunner, especially in the context of injury prevention, is there something I could look at my watch and be like, hey, you know what, like, I got to take a step back here?
Yeah, that's a great point. And normally when I answer your questions, I have like some completely long-winded, ambiguous answer that no one can understand because it's such a complicated subject, right? And I'm like, how can I distill this into 30 seconds? Can't. But actually, on this particular question, I can add some value very quickly. So statistically, the most prevalent injury, if you have a very clear definition of injury, scientific definition, the most prevalent injury is basically knee injury, and it's most commonly what we call PFS, or patellofemoral syndrome. And we were talking earlier about, people coming off the couch and suddenly just running. They never run before because it's like COVID-19 time. And that's what you're going to see. You're going to see tons and tons of knee soreness, knee pain, classic kind of behind the patella symptoms. But that's what's going to happen a lot right now. And one of the interesting things about that is it's a relatively easy injury to get rid of and get through. It shouldn't take very long if you do the right things. And one of the key things that you want to do there immediately is look at increasing your cadence or your step rate if it's low at the moment. And low is in inverted commas because you have to understand like what is relatively low for a given speed. But that's something, for example, right there. So even when we do the most complicated analysis using like 50 different metrics, all combined in clusters, like the first thing I'll look at when I see someone's data from anywhere in the world is what's the pace and then what's the step rate. And you can have a relative scaling between the two. Obviously, there's two ways to go faster. It's increasing step rate or stride length. And so that's the very first thing I'll look at. No matter how complicated the analysis is going to get over the next hour or two, that's the first thing, because you can make a difference just there. So for people that are listening, we have basically an inverse relationship effectively between step rate and contact time. So if you have an increased step rate or cadence, your contact time drops. So the foot spends less time stationary on the ground. And that is your absolute like number one thing before you go into any other deeper metrics that you want to look at. Because I can tell you that, it's a classic thing. You'll be outside walking, someone comes running past you, and maybe let's stereotype for a second. Why not? Let's say it's a guy who's spent a lot of time in the gym and is extremely muscular, extremely strong. You'll often see those kind of strength runners will often have a low cadence because they're naturally very, very strong. Their time under tension characteristics of their muscles are honed, right? So so there'll be a low cadence quite often and a long contact time kind of person. So that's something that you can look at immediately. And of course, almost every watch can give you that information. It's just off the accelerometer inside the watch. So so that's something right there. I would say step rate or cadence rather than contact time. Contact time, obviously, it's a bigger number, it's milliseconds, it's not as easy to digest as the step rate. But I feel good because I've just been able to condense and answer that for you.
That was great.
I think another thing too, kind of going off what Malc said, is the idea that like knowledge is power, right? And so if you can get those metrics like Malc just like perfectly explained, like if you can, I don't know, reach out to somebody, if you do be like, oh, I do want to invest in some sort of technology that's going to give me my metrics or numbers. And if that gives you anxiety of looking and saying, I have no idea what this is telling me, I think it's so helpful to reach out to somebody as knowledgeable as Malc or somebody that's your running buddy and be like, hey, like I know on my Garmin Connected, I'm getting these metrics. How do you use them? Like, how can I actually use these to improve? My mom got herself she's a 65-year-old lady, loves to run. She got a watch, and without fail, after her runs, she'll call me. She has no idea what her numbers mean. She'll call me and say, hey, can you look at my run on Garmin Connect and let's walk through it. And so we do, and it helps her. And so I think that's an important thing, is to, if you don't know how to interpret your numbers and you find value in it, then find somebody who does. I think that really helps.
Yeah, I think, go ahead, Malc.
I was just going to say real quick, because I'm fortunate to be obviously sort of privy to some secret and not secret projects that happen around the world. It's an area that so after wearable technology had its boom, and then we had this period of what we call like wearable fatigue, where people just didn't know what to do with the numbers, and there were too many numbers kind of thing, and people just left stuff on the shelf. And then it became this massive challenge within the industry and research groups to understand how do you condense that down to something that a runner can absorb and care about, but it's still scientifically valid. Because when you do condense things down, it can lose that sort of legitimacy or validity. And it's been the subject of a lot of studies. There's a guy actually called Professor Max Donlan over at SFU, and he was actually he was over in Calgary last summer, and he was really stressing about it. He was like, Mark, how do we take how do we get some AI involved, machine learning involved? How do we take all this stuff that the clinician thinks about, and then we just sync it into a watch or an app on a phone? And I was like, good luck with that. And he'd been working on this at the Locomotion Lab for probably about the last 10 or more years, and still not come to a solution. It's so just from a sort of insider perspective, a lot of people grapple with this, how to put the relevant information in front of a runner at the right time that's distilled down, they can absorb it and then action it, but it's still legitimate. Incredibly hard thing to do.
Yeah, it's so hard. And I think that even I get some of that data, and I think we're kind of at this point where technology is almost there has been that fatigue, and we have moved kind of faster than maybe some of some coaches and physios and chiros can even keep up with, because now as runners, we're empowered with just reams of data. And I can tell you I went for this 10K run, my ground contact time on my left leg is 4% higher than on my right. Hey, something with that. And they'd be like, I was just here to give you a massage, so I don't know what you're talking about. So it's really interesting to see how I think there will be a lot of challenges for kind of the sports healthcare industry to kind of, they'll have to catch up with the amount of data that we're able to provide. Because I remember having that giant brick of a Garmin Forerunner 305. You had to stand outside and spend 20 minutes of your 45-minute lunch break finding the satellites. And now you walk outside and you've just got you open your Garmin Connect app and you've got all this data that really, I think basically Malc is probably the only person who can really dig into to the fullest extent. So it's really interesting. And that kind of brings me to my next point. What do you guys, and I open this up to all of you, what do you guys see in the future of run technology here? Where are we going to be in 5 years or 10 years?
That's a tough one.
Who wants to go first?
I can kick it off. And then hope that was inspire the other two and everyone. But, so I was lucky. I've done a bunch of work in the past with Nike, so I've been privy to some stuff about future planning, what they think the future holds. And a really interesting space is the idea of smart shoes. And people will remember that many years ago, if we go back to like 212 or 211, you know, Nike had the Nike Plus system. There was the My Coach system with Adidas, and there were other things like that. And they basically failed. So they pumped a lot of money into the R&D of it, put it out there. No one was really interested. So they stuck it on the shelf. And a good friend of mine, Ray Browning, who used to be the head of innovation for Nike in Oregon, you know, he wrestled with this himself for a long time. And we were chatting about it several months ago. And this space of like of smart shoes is a really interesting space. One of many that technology will go into, but it's a really interesting one. And of course, it's all about the battle between the brick and mortar stores and the direct to consumer through the manufacturer. And for the direct to consumer to sort of like wipe out the brick and mortar stores, you know, they basically have to figure this out. So how does somebody who's like on the other side of the country order up from like whatever manufacturer.com, and how do they get the right fitting shoe, the right style of shoe first time, and then that company sort of locks that person in as a long-term client. And the idea is smart shoes. You know, so the person, you know, buys a shoe, the shoe has sensors within it. It's talking to your app, it's profiling your running, your run signature, whatever you want to call it. And then essentially, like, the app can tell you your shoes are kind of finished now, they're done. You know, you need to go buy another pair because they're too old. When you go and buy another pair, here's the app with our complete inventory of shoe models, and here's the ones you should go for. So that kind of like automation, a little bit scary, a little bit kind of Terminator style, but it's kind of is a real area of push. And ASICS actually had a shoe kind of like this at CES in January. And they were just kind of showing it off and demonstrating what they could do. And that was a smart pair of shoes. I can tell you that the other big manufacturers are all doing it as well. It's definitely coming in the future. And it is this idea, like it's the way all technology is going, is that one app on your phone essentially can do a huge amount and try and sort of lock you in as a customer and a client. So anyway, that's a little bit of like background on that. But yeah.
No, that's a good one, because I think that like there's this push to make shoes faster and faster and faster and make runners faster. But what if shoes were being designed to make us just like run better? And I think that's like kind of a cool thing to kind of have there. I think that I was trying to turn the thought here. Well, yeah, that was one of the things, because right now you go into Strava, like Strava has the ability to tell like, oh, I ran in these shoes today, I ran in these shoes today. And the idea is that it'll send you an email eventually telling you that your shoes need to be replaced. Now, I completely ignore those. And if you go by Strava, I've got like something like 3,000 kilometers on the same pair of shoes. And in reality, it's probably like a dozen different pairs of shoes. So if a shoe could do that for you, that would be fantastic. John, what do you think about that? What's the future look like?
You know, I think as Malc was saying that, it's interesting because you read scientific papers and there's a lot of different ideas about, well, what is the limiting thing for runners? Is it our neuromuscular system? Is it our cardiorespiratory? Is it our hormones? Is it biomechanics? What is it? And obviously, I think it's a giant picture that everything comes together. So I think, like, personally, from a exercise physiology point of view, I think someday it would be amazing to be able to get different physiological metrics from my watch. Like, man, I'd love someday to be able to look at my watch and get blood lactate measures from the light or whatever technology that gets developed. I think that would be a really important thing for me, or something that maybe could happen from a neuromuscular point of view. I think it would be awesome to have like little electrodes developed that you could place on your calf muscle or your quad muscles that connect to your watch or your shoes or your phone, and then after your run tell you how your muscle activation was, and you could compare that over time. So I think that definitely there's so many different things. I mean, I'm sure sunglasses that'll come out. I'm sure that AirPods and different earwear will come out that'll help us, maybe help us, or just give us more data, I guess, essentially, right? it's a good thing or not.
Well, and that is a really interesting point, and I never even thought about the idea of electrodes, because I think one of the struggles that a lot of runners face, whether they know it or not, is like what muscles are firing. And I think I've seen a lot of injuries with other runners and friends who are like, yeah, my knee hurts, and then you kind of start to go through things with them, and you're like, well, your VMO isn't activating, your glutes aren't firing, and like, and that's probably a chain that a lot of physios will tell runners leads to a lot of injuries. So again, if you know that, like, the idea is that your body well enough to know these things and you can sense. But for me, at least, when my glute and VMO activations were leading to knee injury, I didn't know until I had a knee injury that my glute wasn't firing. And like, how would you expect, like, you're off the couch to 10K runner know that of all?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. How about you, Jess? What do you see in the future? I know that you're kind of in a different realm here. You run on a track, but what do you hope to see even?
Yeah, I'm more give me the new stuff and I'll use it, instead of what good ideas are there. But I think so this was very, very cool to hear, but I think in the very, very, very near future, the biggest thing's going to be the arm race continued with the new Nike shoes. Then every brand will meet, and that's the new minimalist shoe, which was the new maximalist shoe, and now it's the fastest possible shoe. So every single brand will create one, and then another, and then another, and I think that will kind of to occupy the majority of the market for the next few years.
Yeah. Well, and I'll kind of throw that one, kind of taking what Jess said, I'll throw that one back to you, Malc. But could you see, with apps and development and technology moving forward, could you see these shoes and technology not just changing the retail landscape, but could it be telling us like what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong in the run?
Yeah, absolutely. Without giving too much away, I thought John did a great job of not giving any Garmin secrets away there. Yeah, I think there is some really smart people out there. Obviously, some companies have bigger budgets and bigger labs than others, and as we've seen with the Vaporfly shoes, it's the companies with the biggest budget that have to lead the way, and then they kind of show what's possible to the other companies. But I can tell you that there are people out there, there are prototypes, there are things out there already which would blow your mind, like what's possible already. The question isn't actually whether the technology is good enough or there. It's small enough, it's light enough, it has enough battery time, all that kind of stuff. The firmware algorithms are good enough. The big question is about the market and whether the market's ready. Nobody will commit the money and launch the product unless they are really sure now that it's going to be taken up and that the market is mentally ready to go for it. And that's the lesson from 2012-13 that these companies, the bigger companies, learned. The market wasn't ready for it, and the things have to synchronize. So, but I can tell you the technology's there. I mean, wow, what you can do with something that's that's this big and has 20 hours of battery life is quite something today, even. Yeah.
I think that we've come a really long way here, and just it will be interesting to see, because I think that there was the appetite there for people, there was the arms race and is the arms race, and people are willing to pay $200-$300 for a faster shoe. And I think it'll be really, really interesting to see, will people pay, $300, $400, $500 for a shoe that's going to prevent them from getting IT band pain, proactively.
Yeah. I think now more than ever with COVID, because people are needing to be more individually empowered and less reliant on other people, less reliant on physios. Even the success of telehealth physio has been amazing. Something that I never thought would work actually does. So to be able to have that technology freely, not freely, but have it available, I think will provide some security and a sense of safety to people, because then it's in their control more so.
Yeah.
To be taken away again.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's a really cool time to be getting into it. And I think that with so many, again, I said this earlier, I'm hoping that as people, everyone, Jeff, I was looking at you when I said that about paying for the shoes that do the thinking for you. I think it's really cool, and I think that as more people get into it, and I hope that, you know, companies out there kind of market this right and kind of show your layman runner, like, okay, this actually will make you a better runner and this will prevent injury. That's really
it's a tough one, because you kind of have to sell it. You have to make it look really super magnetically attractive. And you know, and Sandy Bodecker, who unfortunately has passed away now, who was kind of a key figure in the Nike setup, kind of had that vision. It was actually Adidas that started off with the sub 2 hour idea back in 2012, but it was really Nike that ran with it, and they saw the potential, not just, oh, we want to like sell some shoes that make people go faster. It was part of a much bigger story, which is breaking 2 hours and you know, like everything that went with it. And then you've just built this like huge peak of like public interest, and then boom, you hit them with the shoes, and it's like bang, you can have it now. You know, you imagine you know, sort of like some sort of injury reduction shoe, like the latest React, and if it doesn't come on the back of that wave of sort of global interest, you just don't sell any. You sell a fraction of the pairs of shoes. So it's going to be interesting if anybody can sort of create that kind of a following behind an injury prevention shoe, because that's really not a very attractive thing to put out. So.
It's a very niche market. I mean, I would like, in my mind, and this is just purely supposition, but I'm like hoping one day there could be a pair of shoes. And so if anybody's listening from a shoe company, that there could be a shoe that, like, you know, maybe it's not my everyday shoe, but maybe like for my long runs or my tempo runs, or like once every like week or two or whatever, I run in these shoes, and it kind of like looks at my gait, my analysis, so I can give it to somebody who knows what to do with the data, and they can be like, yeah, this is what you need to work on.
Like a report card.
Yeah, like, exactly.
Yeah.
So we got a question in here. What was the 2012-2013 market failure, the lesson that was learned? Surely you may have missed it. I think that was Malc.
Yeah, probably was me. So it did hit its peak around about 2012 into 13, which was it's really led by Nike's Nike Plus system, but Adidas had theirs, and there were one or two others. If the question is, I hope I get the question right, which is what has been learned from it. It's basically, that you have to have this synchronization between putting something out there that's quite a dramatic paradigm shift, and then, but the same, it has to be synchronized that the market is ready for it. They're at the right time, like culturally, like understanding wise, to absorb that and to use it. So there was no problem with the Nike Plus system or any of the systems. It was just the wrong timing. So that before there were some things. There were some important people in big companies that had an idea that if you build something cool enough, everyone would just go and buy it because it's just so cool. And so what was learned in 2012-13 was that's not necessarily true. You can have something that your company thinks is so cool, the CEO thinks it's so cool, but no, you have to do your market research, and you have to be sure that the market is ready to go for it. And so that was the learning, I think.
I remember that. I guess, I don't know if I was one of the few people, but I was one of the people who had those Nike Plus trackers in my shoes. They were a pair of like Bill Bowermans, and they were pretty old school. Not old school, but they were these big, thick, heavy shoes. We've got about 5 minutes left here. So if anybody else has any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. Otherwise, one of the questions that I'll kind of ask all of you, because I think we all listening in would call you guys experts in your field. So what podcasts or online resources, and Malc, I know your podcast is one of my favorites, but what do you guys listen to who are the experts that you guys listen to? Podcasts, resources, online stuff.
Right now, I've noticed that a lot of my athlete peers are very bored and unsure of how to like spend their energy and stuff. So they are pumping out Instagram content and Twitter and Facebook and whatever like crazy. So I would suggest, if there's any runner that you are interested in, that you've kind of always looked up to, or even one that's just in your field. So like I follow a lot of 5K runners, 10K runners, whatnot. And I've started copying their mobility routines because they're So I'll play their videos, then pause them and write down all of their exercises and then do them just for something different, because there's a lot of good ideas. So right now, gosh, like Instagram's basically an encyclopedia of running tips. So find people you look up to, find the pros, and then just learn.
Yeah. One, and I know that from your takeover and Trevor's takeover, tons of people have been DMing us being like, yep, this is now my, so you're definitely one of those people for us.
Well, we're sharing our very favorite, best, most impressive, most useful things. So it's helpful because it's already been filtered out. It's just the best stuff we want to share.
Nice. Sean, what about you?
Well, I guess from a tech perspective, the one website that I find quite reliable is DC Rainmaker, which I'm sure most people are familiar with. If you're looking at a piece of technology, he does an awesome job reviewing everything and every feature a lot of times. So that's really a good tech resource I have found. But likewise, I guess from my exercise physiology background, I'm a nerd. I kind of listen to podcasts that are like lectures of exercise physiology. So they're probably not the most interesting for people. But I think I found the same thing that Jess mentioned with going to social media, and it's just kind of like a connect the dots. Like you're like, oh, that person runs, so I'll follow them, and then they have these other great resources that they follow and post. And I think that's helpful. And I guess from my perspective as well, I don't think I'm an expert enough to say a word of caution, but I think that there are a lot of people who are self-proclaimed knowledgeable people, coaches or whatever. But I think the proof is in the pudding, right? And so to make sure that when you are following somebody's training program, that you make sure that they have been successful, or that they do know, or that they are somehow qualified, because you don't want to be following the advice of somebody who's just made famous because they have 10,000 Instagram followers and they don't really, have the real knowledge that can help you as a runner.
Agreed, 100%.
I remember. Malc, what about you?
I'm going to risk sounding like a complete smart ass when I say this, but I actually don't read anything. I don't, in my field, I actually don't read anything from anybody else at all, because I'm like a real kind of empirical person. So I learn everything from just looking at data and learn that way. But so the only kind of podcasts, only things that I follow have nothing to do with my field. But it touches on probably, like, whenever I've spoken to anybody about injury prevention, I've always said, like, the first level of injury prevention is up here between your head, like between your ears. And a lot of injuries, actually, if you go back to the original root cause, not biomechanical or anything else, it actually starts up here with a mindset. And so I listen to a lot of psychologists. And I was really lucky to work with Red Bull in 2012-13. And I had some time being mentored by a guy called Mike Gervais, who's a fantastic performance psychologist. And he has a podcast called Finding Mastery. And I think it's one of the best podcasts out there, sort of in this field in the world. And he does it with a guy called Pete Carroll, who's the who sort of teams up with him, who's the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks football team. And so that would be my my recommendation to people, if on any level, whether it's sport or not even sport, just general performance, is the Finding Mastery podcast with Mike Gervais. Fantastic.
Cool. Thanks for that.
Cool.
And I'm going to plug your podcast again. It's The Art and Science of Running. I listened to it on any of your favorite podcast streaming services.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, well, that's just about all the time that we had for today. I'll do one other quick plug, kind of a side note for everybody listening in. The past few days, I've had a lot of people message me directly about bicycle questions. So over the next couple of days, I'm going to do an Instagram live just answering people's questions on bikes. Totally tangential to running, but I know that it's nice out. People are looking for ways to stay active at home. So if you got any questions about bikes, check out my Instagram at @RafLopez. I'm going to answer a whole bunch of questions about that sometime this week. Otherwise, thank you so much, you guys. This was fantastic.
Thank you, Raf.
Thanks a lot, Raf. Appreciate it.
I think
thanks to everybody listening.
Yeah. And I think this was probably one of the most content heavy talks that we've had. So I definitely encourage everybody, if you miss anything, feel free to listen to it on YouTube. I'll be posting it again, and share the link around to everybody. Send it to anybody who you hear needs some help with running. But this was fantastic.
Perfect. Where are you posting the link, Raph?
I'll be sharing the link on the YYC Run Crew Instagram feed, as well as on Facebook, and I'll just kind of send it out to you guys all so you can share it as well. And,
perfect.
Awesome.
Yeah. It's a beautiful day, so everybody get out and go for a run today, and we'll talk to you all next week.
Sweet.
Thanks, guys.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank
See ya.
you.